Hi, this is Nancy,
And this is Sarah.
and this is our TOK presentation. Our knowledge question is, to what extent does emotion influence reason when making decisions?
This is Tara speaking. Emotion plays a great deal in the decision-making process and is often responsible for clouding reason. We are all a sum of our schema and our experiences which shape our beliefs and emotional reactions. It is nearly impossible for someone to detach themselves from the emotions when making decisions. This may be a good or bad thing when trying to make ethical decisions.
This is Nancy speaking. For our first real-life example, we chose the recent decision by the Trump administration to sign an executive order defunding Planned Parenthood. The politicians on both sides are influenced by their emotions when making the decision on which side they plan to support. These emotions are shaped by their upbringing, their beliefs of those around them, and that eventually leads to their own moral compass, which will strongly align with their emotions. Politicians on the right side will let their emotions regarding abortion guide their decision, while politicians on the left are guided by their beliefs about women's health and the rights that they should have. However, in the field of politics, people will always believe that their side is right and fight with their emotions about their side. However, throughout history, hindsight may change minds about certain decisions. However, when political decisions are made, people are ultimately going to fight for what they believe in strongly with their emotions.
This is Tara again. People are going to fight with their emotions, although some reasoning may be present in order to formulate logical arguments. However, emotion is still the main guiding factor when these political decisions are being made, especially in our example of Planned Parenthood being defunded. Most politicians are more likely to get involved in politics due to an emotional reason. They believe they could influence the government and people by getting involved in what they believe in. Their beliefs are intertwined with their emotions and are therefore influencing their decisions when dictating public policy. And however, how ethical is it for people such as politicians to make decisions for a larger diverse population if they hold opposing beliefs or have not experienced the same struggles or disadvantages of those who they're representing, such as these women who these mostly male politicians are supposed to be representing. Politicians aiming to end defunding the Planned Parenthood are relying on the emotions regarding abortion. However, because they aren't women, it can't be argued that they should not be able to make decisions on policies that only affect women.
This example helped us lead to our first order knowledge question, which is, should predominantly male governments be trusted to determine policies that will mostly only affect women? This then ultimately led to our full knowledge question about the entire presentation about how emotion clouds reasoning when making decisions. Politicians are fighting for what they believe in, which will ultimately correlate to their emotions because they have to have some emotional attachment for what they're fighting for. Otherwise, they wouldn't fight for it. This can affect their reasoning when evaluating certain topics, especially controversial ones such as abortion. It's likely that politicians who oppose it do it for some religious reason, which was present during the upbringing. So it's very much a part of them. So they're going to emotionally fight for it. And the same thing on the left, where people who grew up in more liberal houses believe that women should have certain rights and are going to fight accordingly.
So our second example is World War II battle strategy. General MacArthur wanted to free POWs in the Philippines on the way to attacking Japan, and then other second U.S. General Nimitz wanted a more direct route to Japan, which would require more navy. MacArthur wanted to attack the Philippines because he lost so many soldiers there and vowed to return and free them. This was an emotional attachment that affected his decision-making process, and MacArthur had an emotional attachment to the soldiers he left behind, which probably did have effect on his battle strategy. And so Nimitz, he argued for a more direct route of island hopping to the Japanese islands, and that opposed MacArthur's longer route, which would liberate the POWs in the Philippines and use more men in the army.
MacArthur this is Nancy speaking, and MacArthur let emotions cloud his reasoning, which ultimately affected his decision. Throughout history, this is one of the many examples of emotions clouding reasoning, which can be especially dangerous when important heads of state or generals or people that have to make decisions for a larger group of people, because they're letting their emotions get in the way of proper decisions. When you're thinking of ethics and politics or war strategies, emotionality is going to play a bigger role because they have to think of all the people that they're making decisions for, which can make the decisions very emotional, although they should rely more on reasoning. It is most dangerous in these fields because people expect their leaders to act reasonably and free from emotions when they're making these important decisions.
This is Tara. So for our example, especially, the field of ethics greatly aligns with emotional reactions, because people will argue for what they believe in is moral and correct. General MacArthur believed it was moral to go back and save his soldiers. However, it might have been more moral to go along with Nimitz's strategy and maybe end the war sooner and then save more lives in the process.
This is going on to our third example now. This is Nancy speaking. The Stanford prison experiment was conducted by a professor at Stanford who assigned participants either roles as guards or prisoners. Eventually, the participants got so caught up in this experiment and their roles that they let emotions cloud their reasoning. They started taking on their assigned roles very seriously, and although they were randomly assigned as a guard or a prisoner, they developed these roles so strongly that guards would enforce torture and abuse and use strong authoritarian measures on the students who were prisoners.
Some of the students that were the prisoners passively accepted the guards' abuse, and even the experiment's lead professor, Zimbardo, allowed for the abuse to continue, and he took on the role of the warden, and so the students took on their roles, and even Zimbardo took on his role. And after 6 days, the experiment was abandoned because the guards' behavior was leading to dangerous and pretty much psychologically damaging situations for everyone involved. The stimulated prison experiment turned these college students into the roles they were assigned, and the guards became more aggressive and authoritarian because that behavior wasn't punished, and it soon became normal and accepted to treat these prisoners that way.
Also, the prisoners really didn't see a way out besides conforming to their assigned roles. They also became subjected to the guards' harassment without really second guessing it. The emotions of the guards and the prisoners clouded their judgment of what is right and what is wrong, especially in just an experiment and not a real prison. And the experiment was eventually considered unethical, although in the time the participants did not think of it that way. Even Zimbardo, the researcher's judgment was also clouded because he was hoping of discovering a breakthrough in this field, and he also became so wrapped up in the experiment that he didn't see anything wrong with it until he was forced to take a step back and look at the actual effects.
Are the implications for our knowledge question are that emotion will always have a role in the decision making process. In our three examples, this implication is present. So our first example with Planned Parenthood, the emotions of both the politicians on both of the sides is present and stays present for the whole process. For the island hopping World War II battle strategy example, both the emotions of MacArthur is present in his decision of choosing to go and get the prisoners of war. And then our third example, the Stanford prison experiment, emotion is playing a role in Zimbardo's decision-making process as he is continuing the experiment to get the results he wanted to get and to figure out what was going on in the prison system. Then also another implication is that emotion can have both a positive and negative effect on reasoning, and that reasoning can never act alone. So in every example we've showed, reasoning is always attached to emotion, and it can't really be separate.
When talking about the implication that emotion can have both a positive and negative effect on reasoning, in the first example, you see that it can have a negative effect when politicians rely too heavily on their religion and background and the fact that they're all men when making decisions for women, but it has a positive effect when the left side is fighting to help increase these rights. In our second example, you see emotion only having a negative effect because the battle strategy of going through the Philippines is more costly and more indirect and will ultimately lengthen the war instead of saving more lives because of the emotional attachment MacArthur had. And then in our final example, emotion only had a negative effect because it clouded the reasoning of all the participants and led them to act abusive or have some type of psychological problems, as the prisoners did. Um, so overall, emotion appears to play a more negative role, although that is not always the case.
So, in conclusion, emotions cloud reason to a great extent. However, this emotional reaction correlates with an individual's ethical beliefs, and then this emotion can produce either a positive or negative consequence and is purely situational. Also, a popular belief is that reasoning provides the most logical decisions. However, emotions provide empathy for those who are underrepresented.
This is especially important when making decisions for others. For example, our first one, when politicians are making policies about anything, if they only relied on their reasoning, isolated from their emotion, and the proper decision for the majority, many minority populations would definitely be ignored. So, when making decisions, people must be extremely cautious about how much their emotions are affecting their decision making process and whether it's justified. It's difficult to realize how much of an extent emotion plays when making decisions because people are always used to making decisions based on the best outcome for themselves or others that they believe that they care for, which will cause them to act emotionally. Um, People acting in their own interests or what they think is best will usually cause an emotional reaction because they're fighting for something that they believe in. And if politicians acted solely on reason without emotion or any empathy, um, many minorities would be at risk of being ignored. However, they should still be considerate of how much their emotions are playing in their decisions because it should not always be the main guiding factor.
Emotion is always somewhat involved in decision-making process because it is impossible to fully separate yourself and your biases. You may not even realize certain biases you have because they have always been a part of how you view the world. And your perspective may not always align with others, which leads to compromise or mostly conflict in all aspects of life. You can especially see this in politics because it's so public and followed by the media. However, that that is the ideals of democracy, although it may appear to be a longer, more drawn out process. It allows for the inclusion of all perspectives. And emotions may provide a sense of morality that will influence reason or cloud reasoning in your favor instead for the common good to be represented.